Everyone, welcome to another episode of Founder Wisdom Podcast. Today with us, we have Anisha Nandi. She's CEO and co-founder at Verbate.io. Anisha, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Verbate?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Anisha. So nice to be on here today. Thanks for having me. Verbate is a B2B SaaS platform for building employee communities. So think your women's group or your caregivers group, parents, etc. These groups have exploded as we all shifted to a distributed work world. But the folks running these groups and that program manager at a high level that's overseeing the entire program really needs tooling. And so that's what we are. We help these program managers and these employee community leads do everything from budget management and analytics of the program, tracking data along membership and engagement, to actually planning a lot of the efforts that they're doing on platform. So that's a little bit about who we are and what we do.
Why did you decided to start that kind of company?
Yeah, I think like all good entrepreneurs, right? I had the pain myself. I was over in my former jobs, and I was actually in the corporate media world. And so I was over at NBC and CBS News, and I was really, really interested in how our workplaces were changing, how we can make them more inclusive. And that was just a huge passion of mine alongside my work. And so it became more and more of my day job, right? I was running these groups. I was thinking deeply about them. I was involved in DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion work in my offices, because it was just really important to me. Personally, I'm Trinidadian and Indian. I was born in England. I grew up in New York. And so I wanted to be able to bring more of those identities to work with me. And it was really happening in these communities. They just needed better tooling. And so we built what we wish we had.
What do you say about companies that go apolitical like Coinbase?
Yeah, totally. It's funny. This is something my co-founder and I talk about all the time. He actually comes from the financial tech world. And what we see is that a lot of the companies that are taking quote unquote stances against like, hey, like we don't want to talk about politics in the office, etc. People are still people, right? And it's like a lot of these identities aren't political. Being a woman or just being a parent or being, somebody who has a particular experience or identity, that comes to work with you every day. And so it's not really a controversial thing. And whether or not you realize it, every single company is fostering community. And so, yes, when you get into the politics realm, sure, it's a little bit hairier, but most companies are doing this anyway, including the Coinbases of the world. I actually think Coinbase has a really great ERG program, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, well, I was listening to the Tim Ferriss podcast interviewing Brian Armstrong this morning, and I think his problem was that he was getting tired of getting asked non-company questions in company-wide meetings. That was the very problem, not really that the company was becoming too political. So I think it's just reframing these meetings and saying that, hey, the focus is going to be around this. And obviously, if you have employees that actively tried to destroy your company by humiliating their leaders on the stage or putting them on the spot, that's some folks you need to get rid of. But indeed, like being apolitical is kind of going against human nature. I think we need to discuss about these things, but have good intentions as well.
Yeah.
What do you think?
It's about the dialogue. I completely agree. I think it's about what we hear often is just starting a dialogue that feels good both to employees and leadership. That's actually a huge part of why we build this platform, right? ERGs really enable your people strategy across the board, right? A lot of these communities are involved in your recruiting policies. They're involved in your engagement strategy. And they can be really amazing at that. Companies have known this forever. Microsoft, LinkedIn, they all use their ERGs really, really heavily in their strategy across the company. And when that alignment is there, amazing things can happen. It's just, can you open up that dialogue and create structure and alignment?
My view of the future is that countries will be communities. A lot of people and myself, the counterpoint to that is that it kind of separates people, these communities. So it binds people together, but it also separates them from people that are not similar to them. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, we like to think that we see the opposite. One of my favorite stats about the platform is about 20% of the events or initiatives planned on our platform are intersectional. So it's between your parents group and your women's group. It's between your LGBTQ plus group and your veterans group, right? That's an amazing example. Netflix had this incredible initiative they put together between these two groups that often don't intersect because maybe naturally they don't run into each other and have conversations, right? So you actually see this really powerful phenomenon of these groups and these employees connecting with folks that they didn't think they had anything in common with, but they actually already, first of all, had this bond that they both work at this company together, right? And now they might actually realize, hey, we have more in common than we actually have different. So that's actually the favorite thing that I see happening, is like more connection, not less connection.
Yeah, in the company context, I think that people culturally will have something similar, else they wouldn't be at this company. At least in modern companies like tech companies, for example,
Sure.
that tend to focus on values. And then these subgroups that can even increase more the happiness of the employee, because they can make friends, because that's how you make friends. It's people that you have
Exactly.
some common stuff with. I think outside of the company context, I think that, yeah, you can tribe up with folks that share similar background with you. For example, with me, it would be entrepreneurship, because that's what I identify myself
Yeah,
as. And I think you can also have a respect for other tribes outside and do kind of trade with them. And
totally.
that's kind of my vision of the future in countries. And actually, I pretty much stole that from Balaji, the ex-CTO of Coinbase, that has a nice book, The Network Effect, which I'm reading pretty much every night. So
Yeah.
inside companies, especially with people that are underrepresented, I think it can be a huge advantage as well. And to know that, in other departments, there's a colleague that is also part of the LGBTQ community, for example.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the really cool things that we're also seeing is, especially in a distributed work world, we're seeing all of these different types of communities spring up, not just around identity, but also, like you said, around common interests and shared interests, or even something, one of the most common ERGs or communities that we hear companies launching today is a mental health ERG. And everybody has mental health. So already right there, you have 100% of your company covered. It's just, again, about like, can we create spaces for more dialogue and connection?
Okay, so these spaces, there would be a group chat. Would we meet like weekly to talk about it? And would it be under the company's time, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So typically, historically, the way that these groups functioned is a group chat on Slack or Teams, and maybe, a 40-page long Google Doc with some guidelines around how often we meet. And I mean, these groups have been around for decades, since the 70s. And so that for a long time was the status quo and worked perfectly fine. The big change that we saw over the past few years is now those groups are also expected to actually be pretty involved in a lot of company efforts, like I mentioned earlier, whether it's retention and engagement efforts, like, hey, let's make sure that you're involved in connecting employees. Hey, maybe it's recruiting. Hey, recruiting wants to do a recruiting fair, and we thought that this group would actually have a really good perspective. So they're getting all these responsibilities on them. They're getting budgets are getting beefed up across the board. They have anywhere from 10 to 20 to 30, even up to 100 grand per group allocated towards their efforts. So that whole old kind of paradigm of like Slack channels and Google Docs is breaking. It's not enough infrastructure to manage budgets and membership and data. So, I mean, that's literally why we built Verbate, is we think there needed to be more of that structure. That's what we are. But we think Slack channels are still great for that day-to-day communication. Teams is still great. We integrate really deeply into those tools.
So is it more like a wiki Notion type of tool, or?
It's like, almost think of it, sometimes we say it's like an Asana or like a Jira, like a
Got it.
planning and organizational and collaboration tool, but for your company communities.
Okay, do you target a specific size of companies? So do you go like 5,000 employees plus? Is that your core market?
Yeah, so it's funny. We started out in like a mid-market enterprise segment. So our first few customers were these growth stage, often tech companies that were really forward-looking and really loved what we were doing. And that customer is still great for us. And so they were usually between like 500 to 5,000 employees. What we're noticing is like a really, quite significant upmarket pull, where a lot of companies that have 10,000, 20,000, even 50,000 employees globally distributed have the exact same problems, just on a larger scale. And so we're moving up market a bit to those bigger customers. But I mean, every single company, 500 employees or bigger, has these groups.
Very cool. And how much should a company pay per employee for that type of solution?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We're experimenting on pricing, so we could talk about this for hours, but it really depends on the company. It depends on the size, and it depends on their budgets. One of the things that we've seen that's really interesting is really aligning that value aligned pricing, right? So if you are growing the program, making sure that that feels really comfortable to you within your budget. If you are thinking of adding new groups, thinking really carefully about how that plays into the budget. So there's still a lot of learning to be had on that front.
Why didn't you found a company earlier? You look very energetic, like leader type, entrepreneur type. I'm surprised that you never launched a company before.
I mean, it's funny. I guess I love that feedback because sometimes I feel like I joke. I feel like I like a lot of entrepreneurs. I've always been like the youngest person in the room. We're usually ahead of the curve, right? And so I'm still pretty young. I think that I always knew I wanted to. I lived a whole past life in journalism, right? I was reporting on tech. I was adjacent to all these founders, and I knew that I always wanted to make the jump. But one thing that I knew, and the first piece of advice I got once I was thinking about it is like, you have to find a problem that you really care about, right? Everybody knows this. You know this as a founder. This world is really difficult. It's emotional. It's not worth it if you don't care enough about the problem that you're solving. And so I was always waiting for like, what is that problem that I really want to sink my teeth into? And this came across, and I was like, well, this is something that I've been passionate about forever.
What makes a good tech journalist?
Ooh, that's a great question. You know, I love that question because it's also, I think, what makes me a good founder. Two critical things: asking great questions and storytelling. Every good journalist has those two traits, right? And I think every good founder also has those two traits. And it's one thing that served me so well so far in my founder journey is I'm always asking questions of our customers, of our investors, of other founders. And I'm always then thinking, okay, how does this fit into the story that we're telling?
Are you thinking of launching your own podcast soon?
I would love to. It's definitely something that my founder and I have talked about doing. Again, just always noodling on what that looks like. I think I would love to do it into the future.
It would be so on point because of your journalistic skills plus your founder skills. I think it and like tough conversations about
Yeah.
underrepresented communities. And I mean, community is so trendy nowadays. Are you guys going for some funding pretty soon, or
Yeah, so we bootstrapped and raised from like strategic angels, family and friends to date. We're probably going to raise in 2023 just to really accelerate our growth. And right now just having friendly conversations.
how do you separate responsibilities between you and your co-founder? Your co-founder, is he the technical one and you're the person in charge of fundraising and making deals happen?
Yeah, pretty much. So he comes, like I said, from a product management and growth marketing background. So he's awesome at really leading a lot of our operations, our product thinking, and that some of those marketing efforts that we're starting to really put a lot of effort into right now. And then for my end, I do a lot of the like public facing fundraising, sales, press, et cetera, so that it kind of breaks off really neatly between the two of us.
Where do you see the company in 5 years from now?
Ooh, that's a fun question. Our mission is really to put community at the center of culture and strategy, right? I think that it's so obvious when you have conversations like this that that's where the ball is moving, but it really needs more structure. And so for us, 5 years from now, that means being able to plug these communities, once you give them that baseline infrastructure, to plug them into more of that people strategy and even your company strategy at large. So can you create better swim lanes between how your communities are interacting with your recruitment and with your product team, right? A lot of these ERGs want to influence, hey, we have this really good insight for you when you think about product or policy or recruiting. And right now it's a very messy process. And so 5 years from now, we want to be the place that people can come and voice their perspectives and figure out neat and structured ways in order to influence the company, again, in a way that feels aligned across the board.
Last but not least, any advice for other founders? You've been 1.5 years in the game. How does it feel? Any advice for new founders?
Yeah, for sure. I think my biggest piece of advice, and this is a perfect thing to say, obviously, in this conversation, is meet other founders. I think the thing that has been absolutely like the most inspiring, uplifting, and thing that's gotten me through the hard times in this process is other founders, right? They are your best network for meeting investors, for meeting customers, for keeping you sane when you have a really bad day. Have that founder community, meet as many of these folks as possible. Every founder that I've met is so willing to pay it forward. And so it's never too early to start building that community of fellow founders around you.
Yeah, that's what I like about this community where it's all win-win. I think entrepreneurs, it's just one of the hundreds of reasons why they're changing the world. So thank you so much, Annie, for the interview. Where can people find out more about you and Verbate?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on all the social media platforms, whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm just Anisha Nandi. And for Verbate, you can find us at verbate.io. So that's verbate.io. Feel free to shoot us a note. And also on LinkedIn, we do a lot of great community events and content there as well.